Riyaz Thingana of Grant Thornton, and our very own Arun Giri of TaxSutra.com. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. But Mr. Kanabar, what do you make of this Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana? And there's no getting away from a cess. There's another Pradhan Mantri cess that's been imposed as part of this scheme.
Well, it's in a sense an income disclosure scheme, and given the fact that this income disclosure scheme is past the 45% regime date of 30th September, you have a higher amount to pay. You have to pay, as you rightly explained, 50% tax, and you have to pay 25% or block 25% and have 25% available to you. But what has happened is really that there is a proposition to really revamp the entire Income Tax Act insofar as it concerns unexplained monies, unexplained investment, bullion, jewelry, etc. So it's a whole new regime altogether which has been put together, which I think in some sense cleans up the entire earlier perception that under the Income Tax Act you had an ongoing immunity scheme whereby you could disclose undisclosed income, undisclosed cash, undisclosed wealth whenever you wanted and just pay a 30% tax. So you are putting that regime now to say, if there is anything which is undisclosed and which is unexplained, and you now bring it into your records, you pay a 60% tax. If it has not been detected, if it has not been offered to by you and is detected by the tax officer, then you pay another 6% penalty, 10% of 60%, so 66%. And then there is this provision for the surcharge, which I must say I find some drafting lacuna there, because the surcharge provisions are there only in payment of advance tax, not in the tax per se. Seems to be some error in drafting, which I am sure they will correct. So you have an 81% tax if it is sort of unexplained cash, etc., etc. Whereas if you go under the current scheme, you end up with 50% and 25% being blocked for 4 years.
So you think that this is going to be successful, Mr. Kanabar?
You know, the way I would look at it is, first of all, a 50% rate of tax, while it's an enhancement over 45%, is a marginal enhancement. The 25% blockage is indeed there, but the money comes back to you at the end of 4 years. And effectively, that's an extra 10% sort of going away if you take a net present value basis, depending on how do you discount that money. Therefore, effectively, you are looking at a 60% rate of tax. I would think that it is actually, it should be very, very successful for one simple reason, Sharon. One hears people doing all sorts of illegal things in the marketplace to try and convert unaccounted money into some other source of current money or assets, etc. And even after paying some monies which I tend to hear in the marketplace, the wealth is not yours, it is not clean. Whereas here is an opportunity at a 60% tax cost, so to say, tax plus discounting cost, for you to come clean, have something in your books of accounts which you can use legitimately and sleep in peace. So I would believe this should be very, very welcome and very, very successful.
Okay, Riyaz, let me bring you in. Do you agree with Mr. Kanabar that this is likely to be very successful, and perhaps in a way the government has now really put the fear of God in people?
No, I think,
or the taxman at least.
Yeah. No, I completely agree that this is a good opportunity for people to really utilize and bring the unaccounted cash into the productive system. So while it is 50% tax rate, and as Mr. Kanabar pointed out, the effective rate would be 60% if you take into account the loss of interest over the 4-year deposit scheme. I still think it is a very good scheme, and I think it should be very successful.
You believe that it should be very successful. Arun, you know, you've been looking at the amendments that have been proposed, and Mr. Kanabar there was talking about the amendments that have been made to the section 115 BBE. Now, you know, beyond demonetization and the scheme that has been the income disclosure scheme that's been announced today by the government, this has implications well beyond demonetization. I mean, you've effectively changed the provision for the way that you are going to tax unexplained credit forever.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's been a sea change in the penalty regime. You earlier had, you know, 100 to 300% penalty, which used to be levied on concealment income. So if any taxpayer concealed his income and was caught by the tax officer could levy between 100 and 300% penalty. and you had a lot of litigation on that. That was changed in the Union Budget 2016 to say that there would be two classes for penalty levy. One would be under-reporting of income, another would be misreporting of income. So under-reporting 50%, misreporting I think 200%. So that was that. Now you have a change again in the penalty scheme to say that if you come under section 115 BBE, now again there are two classes. Whether you have declared voluntarily that you had unexplained cash, or whether the assessing officer caught you. Now if the assessing officer caught you, then you have an additional penalty. This is very complicated, Shireen. I must tell you, there are 2 or 3 points that I noted. One, this is complicated. The chartered accountants like Dinesh, Riaz, Rahul, a few others who I can see right now on the screen, they should be laughing all the way to the bank. They are going to be very busy for the next 2-3 years. Number 2 is declaration, whether you are going to declare under section 68, 69 of the Income Tax Act, or whether this will be whether you want to declare under IDS 2. That is another point. Many taxpayers will have to consider whether you want your capital to be locked 25%. No, that's another one. Number 3 is, will this reduce the litigation? What was the worry in the last week or so was so many million, 50, 60 crore people depositing money. How are you going? Does the department have the wherewithal to go after so many people? And I think even the finance ministry would have realized it. So therefore, will this probably reduce litigation and people will voluntarily come? Number 4, Benami Properties Act, that has been amended earlier this year. You remember the earlier CBDT chairperson, Ms. Rani Singh Nair, said that tax evaders are also going to be caught under this. Now, does declaring under IDS 2, which we will call this for simplicity, the Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Yojana, or Section 68, if you voluntarily come forward and deposit unexplained cash deposit, does it save you from consequences under the Benami Properties Act? And number 5, I think the advisors too have to be careful. My good friend M.R. Venkatesh, I think, warned a lot of people, he practices in the PMLA Act, that if the tax advisors are going to give some aggressive tax advice, they have to be careful about Section 3 of PMLA Act. There are so many considerations here. The one thing that catches me by surprise, Shireen, is IDS 2. You had an IDS scheme where the department toiled day in and day out, for 4 months. There was such a massive campaign that was run. The finance minister declared it a success. I think there are quite a few reasons, but the question needs to be asked. You had an IDS window close on September 30th. There is another IDS window. What is the message that we are trying to send to the taxpayers? You could argue it both ways. The government will have a strong argument to say, as one of the big newspapers wrote in the editorial, that you need another IDS to supplement this demonetization. Otherwise, the demonetization is of no use. Some others will say, if the tax evaders are going to keep getting IDS, then why do they really need to come forward and declare?
Valid points, Arun, and you've brought to the table at least 6 or 7 distinct issues that we will take up. So let me bring in Homi into this conversation. Let me start by asking you, Homi, as Arun pointed out, and he quipped that this is going to be good news for chartered accountants, and you're all going to be busy for the next few years. But, I mean, from a practical aspect, how convoluted, how complicated is this really?
The scheme obviously has been notified only today, so we'll have to see from what date is going to be effective. I think the media, it's going to be most likely from November 10th to presumably end of December. The forms have yet to be issued. But I think there's a very good chance for people to come out to disclose their income and the unaccounted income and pay this tax and penalty, which approximates to 50%, and obviously to park the balance amount 25% into this deposit, whereby you don't get any interest and you can get the money after 4 years. And the balance 25%, of course, you're free to use it, So I do think it's a pretty good scheme, and it should be fairly successful.
Okay. Riaz, to the point that Arun made about the possibility of this bringing down litigation, you think that objective will be served as well?
Yeah, I'll just, clarify the issues which were being made about the complications of the scheme. Now, over the last month, we've been hearing of a lot of illegal schemes, and people have been giving opinions over the across various media, saying that if you were to declare your income for the current year as unexplained cash credit, there would be only a 30% tax and nothing else could be done. So actually the scheme which has come in here is precisely aimed at taking care of that situation to prevent misuse, and therefore rather than a complication, I think this was needed to provide the clarity. Otherwise, the litigation arising out of those sort of, misuses which were not really thought out clearly would be far greater. So overall, these clarifications will reduce litigation. There will be a clarity in everybody's mind as to exactly how they want to declare it. And really, what is available to the assessees is the IDS2, as has been named now. As far as the second scheme is concerned, under the unexplained tax credit, that could be used more by the department rather than the assessee, because I don't think that is really a scheme.
Let me also bring in Rahul Garg of PwC into this conversation. Rahul, weigh in on this conversation, and if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in as well.
Yeah, so I had 2 points of view. One is that when we discuss of the black money, currently because of the demonetization, one is focusing on the black money out of currency notes, and what is the proportion of that, and this being volatile, etc., is one aspect, and therefore to me it appears that to actually deal with black money, this is only one step, and we would need to continually look at many other legislative changes, enforcement and administrative aspects to make sure that the black money generation and handling of that reduces significantly, if not completely eliminated. The second point that I wanted to make on the success of the scheme, now look at the success of any of such schemes, only the unaccounted money of the taxpayers or the businesses is what typically comes under the scheme. The unaccounted money which is out of the illegal activities does not come under any of these schemes, because either the Prevention of Corruption Act is excluded, or PMLA is excluded, or few other similar legislation are excluded, and therefore the pot of the black money which is represented by that doesn't get addressed through the mechanism of typical schemes, but to the extent such money is represented by currency, this in demonetization virtually automatically gets addressed, because the people may not come forward to exchange that. If they exchange that, it may be a repercussion in other laws and things like that, and therefore if they were to destroy or make that ineffective, then to that extent partly it is taken care. The other point that I want to make here is that in relation to the success of the scheme, it would also depend, as Dinesh explained, that the overall rate of tax is in the range of 60% plus minus, depending on how do you count the interest. Now, people who had the opportunity to look at 45% rate of tax, now the same people or similar cluster of people is looking at 60% rate of tax. But if you look at the equation, what has changed in the equation of perception of cost of doing and going for the scheme is that today it appears that the cost of handling, managing and continuing with black money is very high for 2 reasons. One, the demonetization has made the currency not a legal tender, and second, as was said, that the black market which is suddenly cropped up, the rates on that are skyrocketed. The schemes which are floated in the market are not foolproof, and also there is a deterrent by continuous message from at least our Prime Minister to say that this is not end of the matter, we are going to look at further policies and interventions to prevent it. And to me it appears that all these lead to a conclusion that the cost of holding it and maintaining it equation has changed significantly, and therefore to me from 45%, even if the effective rate is 60%, except the people who have this money out of illegal activity and are afraid of getting challenged under the other law would definitely come forward to avail of this.
to now get wrap-up comments from each of our guests. And let me start by asking you, Homi, we just heard from each of our panelists in terms of what they believe is likely to be the driver for people to want to disclose under this particular scheme. And of course, the crucial fact that with the amendment of 115 BBE, we actually changed the penalty provisions beyond just that 30th December date of demonetization. So let me get wrap-up comments and any further clarifications that you would seek from the government or anything else that you would like to put on the table in terms of what this really does now to the Income Tax Act post today.
Yeah, I'd like to make one or two comments, First of all, under this new scheme, there's no threshold fixed. Nothing like over 2.5 lakhs or under 2.5 lakhs. So even if you got a lower amount, let's say less than 2.5 lakhs, you could also use the benefit under the scheme and declare it under the scheme. And the second thing I would like to also make an observation is that tomorrow, let's say the tax authorities catch you, they can not only levy this tax and surcharge and penalty, which approximates 85%, they could even start prosecution proceedings. So that is also something to be borne in mind.
Okay, Riaz?
Yeah, overall, firstly, as I had begun, I would say that this entire scheme, given the scenario and the general fear within the people on how to manage black money, should be incentive enough to take care, to encourage people to make this declaration under IDS. And, a good point made by Homi on this 2.5 lakh limit. The 2.5 lakh limit has been considered by a lot of people as an exempt limit. There's no such thing. It only says that deposits below 2.5 lakhs will not be taken for the all India reporting. So there is no exemption, and I think it would be worthwhile even for smaller amounts to go in for these declarations.
Okay, that's an important point that you make there. Rahul, would you agree with what we just heard from both Homi as well as Riaz?
Yeah, that's right. Just one more point I would make is, though the scheme, the Kalyan's scheme, the Pradhan Mantri scheme is something that is coming forward and would apply as a separate chapter under the Income Tax Act, but the amendment that is made in the section on the taxation of undisclosed income, and that being made mid-course, I suspect that that could be a matter of interpretation by the courts, whether such a mid-course amendment amounts to any retrospective amendment, etc. or not, and therefore that could be an issue to watch for in the future. But overall, I am of the view that the scheme should be successful in terms of encouraging people to make the cash actually accounted for and not fall prey to the various things that are happening in the marketplace.
Arun, final word to you.
Shireen, just one sentence. I won't be surprised if the IDS2 is a rage. If the tax evaders are sufficiently terrorized, and if what I have been hearing in the last few days, that a lot of people are just sitting on cash, they have been advised that something might come, just wait, hang on, do not take a hurried call to deposit money. If what I'm hearing is true, then IDS2 could be an absolute rage. And the scheme being so complicated, generally all the amendments, the scheme, IDS got 60 FAQs from the Finance Ministry. I won't be surprised if we get a dozen FAQs from the government.
All right, on that note, the consensus, at least as far as our panel is concerned, is that this scheme is likely to be successful. It is likely to elicit a significant amount of the deposits, and that is what the government is hoping. But of course, more follow-through action will be needed. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us and helping us make sense of the amendments that have been proposed by the government to the Income Tax Act, and also this new scheme, the new income disclosure scheme, the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, and what it means as far as the demonetization drive is concerned. Many thanks for watching.